Let's now take a closer look at UN policies around education for sustainable development. Let's look at the characteristics, pedagogies, and key elements to help us understand what ESD means. So key principles and definitions of ESD, according to Unesco, is that ESD should focus on not only on content, on inserting the content, in the content of curriculum, the notion of sustainable development. But it's also about relooking or reinventing, reorienting pedagogy. So it's the what, but the how. Content, new content that should be seen as interdisciplinary, cross-cutting through all the subjects, so content, but also looking at new pedagogical approaches that are really transformative. ESD should also promote skills like critical thinking and imagining future scenarios. Very similar elements from global citizenship education. ESD should treat the 3 pillars of sustainable development in an integrated manner. ESD should encompass formal, non-formal, and informal education and learning. And the global program, the GAP program, the Global Action Program on ESD that UNESCO has been articulated, also encompasses activities that are in line with the above, but may not even be called ESD. So with this, I would say that much of the efforts of education for sustainable consumption, education for human rights, or even global citizenship education has to do with ESD. So UNESCO has developed over 10 years ago a very good and interesting and useful instrument called Teaching and Learning for a Sustainable Future. It's available online. You have just to Google Teaching and Learning for Sustainable Future. And it's a multimedia teacher education program, very useful, that is available for the past 10 years. And in that, it says that the objectives of ESD is to promote understanding of the interdependence of natural, socioeconomic, and political systems at the local, national, and global levels. So with this, I would like to reflect and maybe to add that ESD brings this component of Earth and life on Earth and caring for the environment into the discourse of global citizenship education. Because sometimes global citizenship education is really looking at people's relationship and intercultural dialogue, whereas ESD brings this relationship with nature, relationship with the Earth ecological supporting supporting systems that require to perpetuate life on Earth. According to them, the objectives of ESD is to encourage critical reflection and decision-making that is reflected in personal lifestyles. The objective should be to engage the active participation of citizenship in building, I would say, a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. Key characteristics of ESD, according to many documents that UNESCO have been articulating, should be interdisciplinary and holistic. Learning for sustainable development should be embedded in the whole curriculum, not as a separate object or subject, according to UNESCO. It should be student-centered and contextualized. Should be locally relevant to really have meaning. A key characteristic of ESD is that it should be values-driven. Thinking, asking people to think about their lives, their decisions, and the impact of their decisions, not only in the immediate community, but around the world. Because ethics is really an invitation for us to reflect on the consequences of each decision we have in the large living mode, global ethics at least. ESD key characteristic should also be critical thinking and problem solving. ESD should embrace the importance of multi-method, using art, drama, narrative, storytelling, and etc. as pedagogical tools. And it should reflect the importance of participatory decision making. In other words, it should be participatory process of learning. All of these, you can find it in the UNESCO 2006 framework for the United Nations Decade on Education for Sustainable Development. Also, UNESCO, just to restate, says that in this document that ESD teaching and learning strategy should be experiential. So experiential learning should be embedded. The use of storytelling as a pedagogical approach, again, should emphasize the importance of values-based education, invitation for inquiry and learning, and the importance of using different spaces for learning, not only inside the classroom. So what is the core ideas inside the Global Action Program? As I mentioned, at the end of 2014, at the end of the UN Decade on Education for Sustainable Development, UNESCO launched the Global Action Program on ESD. And what's envisioned here? According to the UNESCO source book of ESD, it says that what UNESCO, the international community, is envisioning with its international policy around education is that there is a need to reorient a curriculum to address sustainability. Education communities need to identify the knowledge, issues, perspectives, and skills and values that are central to sustainable development and integrate them into the curriculum. What are the goals of the UNESCO ESD GAP program? Number one is to mobilize education and learning to accelerate the process or the progress towards sustainable development. Goal number two of the ESD GAP is to reorient education and learning so that everyone has the opportunity to acquire. Everyone has the opportunity to acquire what? The values, skills, and knowledge that empower them to contribute to sustainable development. Goal number three of the ESD GAP program is to enhance the role of education and learning in all relevant agendas, programs, and activities that promote sustainable development. In other words, there are many UN policy agenda and mechanisms that we're not really looking at the important role education has in order to implement sustainability. And more governments in the international community is elevating the importance of education as a main driver, even as a main driver to implement the 17 SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. What are the priority actions or the priority action areas UNESCO has set to implement the ESD GAP? There are 5 priority actions. First one is advancing policy, because one thing is to have this international policy on the GAP in ESD. The other thing is to shrink the gap between the international policy and the implementation at the national and local level. So the first priority area of the ESD GAP is to stimulate, help, motivate governments to develop national policies or national strategies, national programs to implement the ESD GAP. Priority action area number 2 is about transforming learning and training environments. It's really to, if we are looking at a new approach to education, if we are looking at a new approach to education so that it is transformative and it's values-based, we need to rethink the physical space of education that is more conducive to interaction, that is more conducive also to spending time in nature, and etc. So transforming learning and training environments. So the educational institution environments, a university, be it a university or a school, that physical environment needs to be transformed so that the environment itself, the institution, is more coherent to the values of sustainability. Number 3, or priority action number 3, is building capacity of educators and trainers So UNESCO is really keen at further promoting new capacity building, teacher training, so that teachers are really aware of what sustainability is all about, but also have the tools and instruments and ideas to help them infuse and integrate the values of sustainability in their teaching. Mathematics, social studies, law, engineering, could be anything. The idea here is how to incorporate the values and principles of sustainability in all aspects of learning. It does not need to be only related to science, for instance, right? So building capacity of educators and trainers to infuse sustainability into teaching of language, social studies, and etc. Priority area number 4 has to do with engaging youth. It's empowering and mobilizing youth from around the world as agents of change to embrace the vision of sustainability and be leaders in the process of social transformation. Priority area number 5 has to do with accelerating sustainable solutions at the local level. So UNESCO is looking at how to engage with local communities, local governments, local community leaders to embrace the shared vision of sustainability and also as a way to inform their decisions and etc. 2 interesting resource materials that we could say that is available online in the UNESCO website. One is this, is the UNESCO sourcebook on ESD that offers not only concept ideas and theories about what SD, sustainability, or ESD means, but also some tools and ideas. And the framework for the decade, because it has also important information that is available in various languages in UNESCO website. One of the important things that UNESCO is emphasizing in order to implement ESD inside the educational institution, again, be it a school or a university, is the notion of whole institutional approach. The idea here is that sustainability in ESD should not be only seen as something to be incorporated in the formal curriculum and the content that is taught in a cross-cutting approach or interdisciplinary approach. But it should also be inserted in the school management, the operations of the educational institutions, because you cannot teach, of course, about the values of sustainability and not be coherent about that in the operation and the management approach of the institution. In other words, the operations of the education institutions should reflect and be coherent, go along the lines of the sustainability approach. Should be incorporated in school policies, special events that the education institution organizes, and etc. In the school and community interaction, in the pupils' engagement in decision-making, and overall in the whole school ethos. It's the culture. Given this, the Earth Charter Education Center has been looking at this to further promote the intersection between the idea of sustainability, the values and ethical approach of that, and how to infuse or embed that in education. And for that, a UNESCO chair on Education for Sustainable Development has been set up. UNESCO chair on Education for Sustainable Development and the Earth Charter, to look at that from an angle of research and training. So the focus of the chair is really to further develop research and training on ESD from a values-based approach. Given this, our approach, similar to what UNESCO has been saying, has to do with infusing ESD values in the content, the new pedagogical approach, the operations of the education institution, the physical space, and the relationship that or the role that the school has in the community in which it is embedded. So this whole institutional approach to sustainability that really should be looked for, it seeks to transform the whole institutional approach. Really, it's like embedding sustainability values and ethics in the DNA of the institution, education institution. Looking back at all these policies, many educational policies that UNESCO and the UN is issuing, international frameworks that are already there, the question is, what could be in common? What lies behind these various policies that governments and educational institutions are supposed to implement? Because it's very hard to implement various agendas if we look at them from a fragmented approach. Because all of them have things in common, but all of them have their own particularities and focus. I would say there are three things that are in common. All of them, all these UNESCO policies are inviting to look at things from an integrated approach, a systemic approach, how to infuse in education, an education that helps citizens to look at things from an integrated or systemic approach. This is very common. It's kind of one of the commonalities in all these UN education policies, stressing the importance of system thinking. Pedagogy. All these UN and UNESCO policies around education are all also inviting national governments, teacher training institutions, and schools to really take the challenge to reorient the how inside the classroom. Many of these new pedagogical approaches are not actually new, because they are there for over 100 years ago with theorists or philosophers of education that were stressing the importance of experiential learning, interactions, participations, contextualized education. But the beauty of it is that now this idea is really enshrined and inserted in UN policies, elevating the importance of new pedagogical approaches that are more transformative. So all these various UN policies are pretty much similar in terms of how it's approaching the methodology and the pedagogy from a new, more transformative learning processes. But also all of them are stressing the importance of values, of inserting values for the common good, values of a global ethics that humanity share, how to insert values in processes of learning. And I would say that they also have something in common, that for many years, we have looked at education as a process to feed the brains and the minds and the intellect of people without looking at the more emotional, the affective role of education. So I would say that in all these UN international policies around education that are elevating the importance of education as a driving force for social transformation, they are looking at a pedagogical approach that really looks beyond only the cognitive approach of education. Systemic, looking at how to connect the dots, and, as I mentioned, the values-based education. What comes to our mind when we envision an educational experience, being it at a higher education level, if I'm receiving education to become a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, that has really infused values of the common good, global ethics as part of my training? How would the world look like if all the engineers and lawyers and business people have been receiving an education, not only with the skills for them to implement their knowledge, but also with these lenses of global citizenship, of caring for one another, caring and respect for the community of life? Probably it will be much easier to change the current world situation to a more just and sustainable world. From a Nurse Charter point of view, and I would say also that links to the UN policies. We have to look at the teaching and learning spaces as a space to promote dialogue, shared vision, and collaboration. And that's what the Earth Charter movement initiative has been promoting. Using values or inserting values to promote dialogue on even sometimes difficult questions in terms of dilemmas of where I'm more concerned and responsible for my local situation rather than the globe, and etc., and etc. So the idea is that these instruments, dialogue, shared vision, and collaboration, can be seen as pedagogical elements in value-driven education.